It's the Worth Knowing live stream. I'm Matt Robison, and the biggest story on the planet is starting this week. If you had to choose one event, one expression of human endeavor that best captures what human beings are interested in and send it on one of those gold records aboard the Voyager spacecraft meant to be discovered by intelligent aliens one day, something that shows what our species does when we get to choose how to spend our time, you would probably choose the World Cup. It's not just the most watched sporting event or the most watched human activity of any kind on Earth. It commands our brains, our dollars, and our time. I know that on this show, we usually talk about politics and government and economics. And this World Cup is about all of those things. And we're going to talk about them today in just a minute with our outstanding guest. But most of all, this show is about things that are worth knowing. And the World Cup definitely is. And that's particularly true from an American standpoint. And it's particularly true for me. For America, we occupy a deeply confusing, if not downright baffling place in the global soccer landscape. While our women have set the pace and redefined the scale of the sport for female athletes, our men have struggled as plucky underdogs and downright upstarts, even as America has crested to global preeminence in almost every other field of human endeavor. Our men's team is a quintessentially American story of scrappy fighters who really have no hope in the eyes of the world against the global soccer empire, only a fool's hope. And as we approach the 250th anniversary of our founding in our war of independence from a global empire, what could be in a more American story vein than that? And yet, strangely, impossibly, we do have a chance of doing something amazing and shocking everyone this summer. We're in the midst of a golden generation of soccer talent, the likes of which our country has never seen before. And that's also, in its own way, quintessentially American. Our players are the children of world leaders running next to the children of convicted felons. Players who ascended to the most elite heights of youth soccer next to players cut from America's youth program, only to fight their way back to the top. Players whose parents came here with the most American of stories, the immigrant story, and who chose the United States as their country to represent it because it was their land of opportunity, their chance to shine, the place where they could make the most of their talent. The journey that the U.S. men's national team is about to embark on, starting this Friday, June 12th, is the hero's journey, a Joseph Campbell hero of 1,000 faces journey of our best and brightest young people ripped from a familiar world and sent onto a quest into the unknown and guided by a mysterious wizard. In this case, our Gandalf is an Argentinian soccer guru who believes in the mystical power of lemons and whose choices have seemed like madness until, incredibly, in recent months, they've started to work. And it seems like we might be able to take down this Death Star with our stunt fighters. I'm not kidding. By the way, one of our leading players literally goes by the nickname Jedi. He sounds like Sir Alec Guinness when he talks, and he named his children Ocean and Atlas. I mean, what better indication of the global ambition simmering inside our team? One more thing. I said that this was personal for me because I've been a fan of this team for more than 30 years. I've gone to countless matches. I've seen us fall and fail and somehow reform and rise again. And maybe it's because of all of those stumbles that the team has become so endeared to me. And now, on the eve of the first men's World Cup in 32 years on American soil, the most consequential human activity on the planet, I'm thrilled to devote this show to understanding what's at stake in this World Cup and for the world and for the players, and for our team and for our country. Because I know what's at stake for me: fascination, terror, inspiration, and hope. And maybe by the end of this discussion, you'll feel the same way. And to get into all of it, I'm thrilled to welcome one of the great chroniclers of world soccer, the World Cup, and the U.S. men's national team in his new and truly outstanding book. I've read it, The Long Game, U.S. Men's Soccer, and its savage 4-decade journey to the top, or thereabouts. Senior lecturer at Marist University and columnist for The Guardian, Leander Schaerlaeckens, who I just mispronounced your name. Gosh darn it. But I think I came close, pretty darn close. Maybe the story of the U.S. men's national team this summer.
It was a very credible effort. What a good intro. It is an amazing story, this national team. So I appreciate you teeing that up.
It is an amazing story. It really is. And I think it's hard for people who haven't followed the saga, as I have, and now you've chronicled, to really understand what's the fascination with a team that isn't and has not been up till now in the very upper top level. It seemed to disappoint and fall apart. I mean, But let's get into the larger context of the World Cup itself.
Mhm.
You heard my version, and I feel like I'm asking Russell Hammond, why do you love rock and roll? But just in case, someone who doesn't follow soccer closely, why pay attention to the World Cup?
So I love soccer deeply. I was born in the Netherlands. I grew up in Belgium. I went to college in the UK. So steeped in the sport my entire life. We moved here full time when I was in grad school. My wife is American. I am now a citizen. And so I've been in the thrall of the sport since I was about 7 years old. And I love the tactics. I love the action. I love everything that happens on the field. And nevertheless, the play, the actual soccer being played, is the least interesting part of the sport to me because soccer just swallows and envelops absolutely everything. It's geopolitics, it's
Mm.
socioeconomics, it's philosophy, it's everything. Just any kind of problem or phenomenon or occurrence in the world can be explained through soccer. And there's several books to that end, some of which are very good, that just use the sport as a microcosm because it just works, because it's one of the few things that the entire planet shares. Like culturally, what else can you think of aside from breathing air and needing water and wanting our children to thrive and to be safe? There are so few things that all of humanity has in common. And soccer is very nearly one of them, right? Because there are so few countries that don't take the sport seriously. And to get into one of the things that you alluded to there, I think that we have a kind of sporting exceptionalism at work in this country where we assume that any sport we take seriously as Americans, as the United States, we should either dominate or be competitive in, right? And I think that's maybe why soccer is vexing to some people because we sure do love a winner. And we haven't gotten one yet on the men's side. And I think we're on our way. I think it might still be a little ways off. But so, in that sense, too, soccer just offers these sort of epic narratives and these arcs of thriving and seeking and just trying to be a little bit better than you are. Right. And so the World Cup is really the platform where all of that plays out. It's only happens every 4 years. I think this is the 24th World Cup, right? So there haven't been that very many of them. Only 8 countries have won them, which is to say that there are 211 FIFA members minus 8, so 203 who are in the same boat we are and just trying to figure out how to get to that promised land. And so the stakes are so unbelievably high. The World Cup final will be watched by more than a billion people. And I always chuckle a little bit when people talk about the Super Bowl as the biggest game of the year because every single week, just about, there's a soccer game somewhere that's globally drawing a bigger audience than the Super Bowl. But so it all comes together at the World Cup. It's the highest stakes. It's the biggest thing. It's the biggest thing in sports. It's arguably the most popular and most paid attention to thing in just about any human endeavor that doesn't ultimately matter all that much, right? And so legacies are made there. Lionel Messi, to my view, the greatest soccer player of all time, his resume was considered incomplete until he had won the World Cup for all that he had done and for all that he'd won and for all the goals that he'd scored until he'd finally won the World Cup. He wasn't secure in his legacy. And you could see because he's a very stoic and very quiet little man. And he just basically bawled for the next 3 months, just cried and cried at every event that they had, because you could just see the relief draining from him after 30 years of frustration. And so it's operatic, it's poetic. There's really nothing like the World Cup.
I want to get into some of those operatic, poetic storylines and questions that are in your mind that are driving this brimming story. Get us all smart fast. What storylines are you watching most closely? What are those biggest dramas to keep an eye on?
So there's a bunch going on the field and off the field. Nobody expected after the Qatar World Cup in 2022 that Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo would still be here. Messi's going to be 39 during this World Cup, which is crazy.
And yet still feels young to me.
Yes, and to me, let's not hide that. But Cristiano Ronaldo at 41 is going to be there as well. And there's arguments to be made that credible soccer knowers will tell you that Portugal would probably be better off without Ronaldo, but such is his clout and such is his influence in that federation. That's just a non-starter, and he will exit the stage when he is good and ready to. And Lionel Messi has been playing in Major League Soccer and has certainly lost a step, but is still very much there. So that's interesting. How do those guys go out, assuming they don't play another World Cup at ages 45 and 43, which is just bonkers. Even when you consider Tom Brady played until that age, but he did it in a sport where he only had these sort of short little bursts of action to worry about. And of course, he had a whole cordon of guys that stood there to protect him. Whereas in soccer, it's continuous, it's fluid, it's hot. It is hard to play soccer into your 30s, let alone your 40s. So I'm watching that. I'm really interested in how some of the big teams will do. France made the last two World Cup finals, won 2018, lost on penalties to Argentina in 2022. They are stacked. Once again, they've left players at home that just about any other country would very gladly build their teams around, and they have that experience. Spain is really fun. They have an 18-year-old called Lamine Yamal who's already led Spain to the Euro when he was 16 during a tournament when he turned 16. He was 15 when it started. He is very much looking like the heir apparent to Lionel Messi, plays for Barcelona as well. Spain is experienced, but also really young and dynamic, so they should be fun. If England doesn't win the World Cup, and they once again have the talent to do it, but do they have the makeup? Do they have the savvy to do this thing, to win 5 knockouts games in a row? If they don't win it this summer, they will be going into their 7th decade of not having won the World Cup, and that drought will just carry on even further. So on the field, those are the things that interest me, in addition to what's the effect going to be of this tournament expanding from 32 teams to 48, which means that the group stage becomes a little bit less consequential, and we can get into the specifics, and there's an extra round of knockout soccer. So that means that you need to win 5 games in a row to win the World Cup rather than 4. What's going to be the effect of this tournament now being 39 days, of the heat, of the travel, and all the rest? And then, of course, there's all of the off-the-field stuff. The fact that Africa's top referee was just denied entry into the country, even though FIFA promised that if the US would host, they would let everybody in that needed to come into the country. There's players that are having a hard time getting into the country. There's Iran. To my memory, I don't believe there's been a World Cup before where the host country was actively embroiled in conflict, war, whatever we want to call it, with one of the participants, right? So that's interesting. The prices of tickets, it seems like there's a rather stunningly large number of tickets that haven't sold yet because FIFA chose to price them very aggressively. And I think they're trying to figure out how they're going to walk back some of that inventory that hasn't moved. So that's interesting. Who's actually going to be at these games, and what sort of legacy will this tournament be able to leave when it's a lot harder for people to amble into a World Cup game almost by accident the way it was in 1994?
Well, let's get into that last part just for a second, because it really ties to something you cover so well in your book, The Long Game, which I'll splash up here on the screen. Again, I couldn't recommend it more highly. I don't just recommend every book by every author that's on this show, but it's really, you don't have to be a soccer nut to really enjoy this story, which touches on so many aspects of sport, politics, culture, immigration, and history. You touch on this, though. What does it mean specifically that the World Cup is being held in the US again after 32 years, commercially, culturally? What's the impact of all that?
So the World Cup was here in 1994, and it changed everything for the sport. It had taken US soccer a good decade, and thank you for the nice words about the book, by the way, I appreciate it. It had taken US soccer a good decade, maybe longer, to convince FIFA that it would be a good idea to put a World Cup in the United States. And what finally swayed FIFA, or started to sway it, was that at the 1984 Olympics, the last 3 games of the soccer tournament all filled the Rose Bowl. And it was 93,000 seat capacity at the time, something like that. And FIFA went, oh, we can make some money in this market, which is ultimately what it all boils down to for them. And we'll get into that, I'm sure. And so initially, the 1994 World Cup, they were going to play, they had a sort of more modest scale in mind. They were going to play smaller college football stadiums in smaller markets. And then US Soccer got a new president, Alan Rothenberg, and he said, no, you know what? Let's go really big. Let's book the Rose Bowl. Let's go to the Meadowlands. Let's go to Cowboy Stadium. Let's do all the big venues, and let's set our prices aggressively. Let's just go for it and hope it works out. And it did. even though that tournament had 24 teams and they played 52 games, whereas this one will be 48 teams and 104 games, they set attendance records in 1994 that still stand for total attendance and for average attendance. This tournament caught fire. The whole country got swept up in soccer fever. It was a huge success, and it changed everything for the sport, right? Because people, even though the tickets weren't cheap, as I said, relative to ticket prices at the time, they were cheap enough that people could be like, hey, you know what? We're not doing anything Saturday. There's a game half an hour away. There's still tickets. Let's give it a shot, right? And a whole generation of Americans fell in love with soccer, or at least became tolerant of it after that tournament. The other thing it did is it built human capital. And so an entire class of administrators who put on that tournament would go on to then run Major League Soccer and run all these other soccer operations in the country. And it left a surplus of something like $70 million, which could be reinvested in the sport, which was used to start Major League Soccer, to put on the 1999 and 2003 Women's World Cups. So the legacy of this thing was enormous. And you're not going to see anything like that kind of impact in 2026, unfortunately. And there's a few different reasons for that. One of them is that tickets are so expensive that nobody's going to, as I mentioned, is just going to wander into a game and buy $2,000 tickets. There's not going to be any surplus left because for the first time, FIFA has arranged it in such a way that until now, every World Cup was put on by a local organizing committee, which was put together by the local soccer federation. So the 1994 World Cup was staged effectively by US Soccer. This time around, FIFA said, we're just going to do it ourselves. They opened headquarters in Miami. They rented some office space in Trump Tower, although what I'm told is nobody's ever there. So draw whatever conclusions you will. And
I think this audience is savvy enough to know.
Okay. We understand each other. Glad to hear it. And so that way, they basically said, we're going to take care of everything. And that also means that FIFA directly captures ticket revenue, broadcast revenue, sponsorship, parking, and even concessions. And that really the only thing that's left is they said, okay, the 16 cities that are putting on games, 11 in the US, 3 in Mexico, 2 in Canada, you guys are in charge of the fan fests, which is the open viewing parties, transportation, and security, which are the 3 things that don't make any money and that cost a lot of money, right? Which is why you're seeing all these headlines of New Jersey Transit going, we're going to need to charge $150 per ticket because, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to follow up on that because I also do want to zero in on the US team and your book because there's so many compelling storylines coming out of that I know people want to talk about, but this is a really interesting financial picture that you're laying out. I want to ask just straight up, did US Soccer get worked over by FIFA here? Because you mentioned local costs. New York and New Jersey officials are planning apparently to spend roughly $503 million, even as FIFA is, as you outlined, expected to reap billions from the tournament. And ticket prices have been set out of the reach of most fans. Our family had a dream that we were all going to go opening round, West Coast. This would have cost our family of 5 $10,000, $15,000 easily. It's just so far out of the reach of most Americans, which of course feeds into the whole political narrative about affordability and the cost of living. But it also strikes me as a massive, if US Soccer had the ability to set the pricing, it's a massive kind of penny wise, pound foolish move because of the 1994 legacy that you laid out, where it ignited 3 decades of expansion in the most promising commercial market for the sport on earth. And you have the opportunity to do that again and get a whole new generation of fans hooked on this. And you could have tied in, I mean, they screwed up the shift of the MLS window, but we'll leave that for a total nerd out podcast.
That's a deep cut.
That's a deep cut. But I mean, is that really the consequence that you're seeing here of FIFA driving the bus? And in this case, it seems like driving it right over US Soccer.
I think that's exactly right. So what I was saying about public transportation is that now all of these local governments are put in a position because all of this was agreed to when the US won the bid for 2026, which was back in 2018, right? And so most of these host cities now have new state government, new local government, and they inherit these deals where suddenly Mikey Sherrill discovers that New Jersey signed a deal to take care of this transportation. And she's, well, hang on a minute. They worked out that the disruption to NJ Transit was going to be something like, I forget the exact number, but it was like $40 million or something. And so now she has to choose, am I going to put that on the taxpayer, or am I going to take the terrible PR and charge these World Cup visitors $150, which has since come down to $100 because they found some sponsors? That was the other thing. FIFA said, oh, you're not going to wind up paying any of this because you can just sell sponsorship. You can have sponsors for your fan fest and for your transportation. The issue is that FIFA has such a vast portfolio of its own sponsors that it's almost impossible to find anyone to sponsor these local markets that doesn't clash with FIFA sponsorship, and that doesn't prevent them from just going to the market and say, okay, who'll pick up the tab for this? Because there's just no room for that to happen. So all of those things contribute to the fact that 1994 really put the World Cup and really put soccer on the map in this country in a way that it hadn't been for 70, 80 years. And we can get into the history. 2026, the idea was, one, to unify the North American continent, because the big bolded words on the bid book were unity, opportunity, and certainty, or certainty and whatever it was. So at the time, because of political currents, they very much wanted to do a bid together, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, to start rebuilding some political bridges. And the other thing is they said, look, this is a safe bet for FIFA. There have been a lot of World Cups in recent memory where there were questions over whether this thing was going to succeed and whether it was going to flop financially. And they said, come here, you'll do well. And so FIFA has taken that and really run with it and said, yes, we'll do well. And then we'll take all of it with us, because they are projecting something like $11 to $14 billion in revenue. And really the way they've structured this thing is that they're going to take every bit of it back to Zurich and just leave these local markets to, if they're lucky, break even on this thing, and to really sideline US soccer, which expected to be much, much more involved, and to have the chance to build this long legacy tail out of this World Cup the way they did in 1994, that it's just not had a chance to do.
All right, let's go from the profane to the sacred for a moment, because
Okay.
You've laid out really the sad part of this, although not nearly as gripping and in many ways horrifying as the story you lay out about Qatar in the last World Cup in your book. But let's talk a little bit about your book and about the US. So you get into you set this up in a really interesting way. You aren't just organizing this as a sequential history. You're giving us these kind of interrupting vignettes of the people, the stories that we're going to want to know going into this summer. Could you maybe pick one that you found the most compelling, a story that you think people should know going into watching this US team this summer?
Ask me to pick one of my children, why don't you? I only have one, so that's easy,
Yes.
actually. But narratively, I have many. Well, I'll go with actually the guy whose jersey I'm wearing. I know there's no cheering in the press box, but the U.S. has a World Cup game in 3 days, so it's fine. Weston McKennie.
Yeah.
He's this cheerful, goofy army brat whose family got stationed in Germany when he was 8 years old. He discovers soccer. He falls in love with it. This happens to be while the 2006 World Cup is in Germany. And he stands in line for hours and hours. His mom holds him out of school one day, and he meets Landon Donovan and Carlos Bocanegra this is a few months before the World Cup, while they're doing some kind of fan event. And then he experiences the World Cup during a fan fest in Germany because his family couldn't get tickets. And you talk again about the sort of knock-on effect these tournaments have if you allow them to have those. There's a whole generation of American players now on the national team that were inspired by having those amazing moments, witnessing them at the World Cup. So Weston McKennie, they move back to the United States after that deployment is over, and they move to Texas, Weston and his brother and his mom. And he winds up playing in the travel soccer scene. And if you want to ask the question, why didn't we become competitive as a nation in men's soccer sooner? A lot of the answer redounds to travel soccer and the way that the sport that's supposed to have just about the lowest barriers to entry, and that one of the reasons why soccer is so popular around the world is because it's simple. You need something to kick around, ideally a ball, but not even necessarily, and a place to do it. right? And somehow our youth soccer scene cost thousands and thousands of dollars to be seen and to be coached by all the correct people. Anyway,
I will add to your editorial digression that as the father of two kids who have gone through, well, three overall, one's on the swimming side. They get you in swimming too, but
oh, good.
it's
Okay.
maybe not as bad as the way they get you in soccer. AAU basketball, also a little less expensive. Two kids who've gone through, and one who's still going through the club soccer pathway. And it's every bit of what you describe. And I'm literally writing about this on my Substack as a follow-up to this right now. So I hope if you're watching this, you'll subscribe and I'll pop that up on the banner. But it is really stunning. But go on. So Weston McKennie
Yeah.
somehow
So,
manages.
so he gets found by the US soccer sort of youth scouts. He gets sent to, at the time, we had a full-time live-in under 17 academy in Bradenton, Florida. Landon Donovan came from there, DeMarcus Beasley, a whole generation of players came through there, Christian Pulisic, Tyler Adams. But Weston McKennie, who is now a star for Juventus, one of the blue chip teams in Italy, one of the juggernauts of European soccer, where he is not the best player necessarily, but probably the most valuable because he played just about every position last year. And he's tall. He combines a lot of those traditional American soccer player strengths in that he's really fit and really physical, but also he's technical and he's smart about the game. He matured really late physically. So he actually got cut from the under 17 academy and got sent back to Dallas, which they weren't supposed to do in the middle of a school year, but they did anyway. And so he winds up in the FC Dallas Academy. And what happened, and the reason that Bradenton, the National Academy, closed down is that the 30 MLS teams all built their own youth academies and got serious about developing players. And soccer as a sport, the crucial years are like ages 9 to 15, 16. Those are like the key development years. So college soccer doesn't help you. High school soccer doesn't even really help you, right? In Europe, in South America, if you haven't turned pro by 17 or 18 as a soccer player, chances are you're not going to make it. It's just a sport where you develop really young. And so McKennie was lucky that FC Dallas had opened an academy and that he was able to play there. And that sort of gave him a backdoor. And he winds up making it as a professional soccer player. And by the time he's 18, he's playing in Germany. And one of the things I found so interesting about tracing Weston McKennie's story is what it tells us about the larger player development landscape in the United States. And the Dallas Academy director, he made the point that if you compare Texas to Spain, right? The Spain at any given time has about 300 professional and semi-professional soccer teams. Texas has 3, right? There's an awful lot of talent in Texas. And he made the point that, so the FC Dallas Academy, you should know, is one of the best ones in the country. And when you look at the lineup for the US at the World Cup, chances are at any given time, there's 2, 3, 4 players on the field who came through the FC Dallas Academy. He made the point that Dallas and Madrid are roughly the same size. Dallas actually has more citizens by about 1 million than Madrid does. Madrid has a dozen professional soccer teams, which is to say that Madrid has a dozen high-level youth academies that are free, because that's the key. If you play in an MLS youth academy, if you're good, you play for free. And so a kid growing up with any sort of talent in Madrid is 12 times as likely to wind up in that pipeline to the pros as a kid with talent in Dallas. And Dallas is one of the places where we're actually doing this well, right? And so it was a really nice parable, I thought, for the evolution that we've seen, because if McKennie gets sent home from the under 17 academy 5 years earlier, he disappears altogether. There's nowhere for him to go, and we never hear the name. So it was a sign that there were multiple paths for someone like him, which is a sign of growth. But it also indicates how much further we have to go as a nation before we're going to build a real World Cup contender. Is we need a lot more of those environments for kids to develop affordably.
And yet, somehow, some way, he finds his way in through the back door, and his path, his story is just one of the many that you outline in, well, and tell in great detail in this book. And they're each fascinating, and they're each a story of overcoming incredible obstacles in their own way. I alluded at the top to Gio Reyna, the literal prodigal son, in a way, the scion of a US soccer legend, sent home from the last World Cup for a bad attitude, underperforming, and yet possibly the most talented player that we've produced ever, and back with the team. We have Tim Weah, the son of literally the greatest soccer player on earth 30 years ago, who went on to become a world leader, the president of Liberia, for goodness sakes. Now coming into his inheritance here on the U.S. team, Christian Pulisic, the face of U.S. soccer. All of these stories and many more are scattered throughout this book in a really delightful way. I'd love to tell them all, but I hope people will buy the book instead. The link is in the show notes for this. I want to talk about how all of these stories, all of these people add up to a team that is now, you say in the subhead of your book, at the top or thereabouts. Prediction markets currently give the U.S. only about a 10% chance of reaching the semifinal.
Okay.
What do you think is realistic? What do you think is likely? And what does success look like for this U.S. team?
I'm really pleased you added the little nuance at the end there. I think the elephant in the room that we have to face is that the US has been to 11 World Cups and they've won exactly one knockout stage game. And that was in 2002, and that was against Mexico, which is a regional rival, a very testy games over the years, but also a team they knew really well, right? And so now with the knockout stages structured the way they are, after the group stage, you survive that, you go to the round of 32. So just to equal the round of 16 performance that has been where they've lingered at the last few cycles, that's where they reached in 2022 and 2014 and 2010, 1994. They would need to win one more game than they had before. So for me, the sort of benchmark for success is the quarterfinal, which would mean winning 2 knockout stage games, which would mean tripling the number of knockout games they've won in their entire history, because they have that home field advantage and because I think this team is better than previous teams the US has had. That would make it a really successful tournament. After that, it's a roll of the dice, really. I think it's why you'll see on betting markets that even the favorites for the tournament have something like maybe 20% chance of winning the thing, just because it's incredibly fickle and it's a low scoring sport and really anything can happen. But I think that the important caveat here is that making the quarterfinal and the country not caring, right? You need this team to really, this isn't just about doing well at this World Cup. This is also about cementing the sport and pushing it further into the mainstream and building on that work from 1994 of establishing soccer and to really get it to the next place. That you also need the country to care and to ideally catch a bit of soccer fever. So if you get to the quarterfinals, but the country doesn't care, I would argue that's less successful than reaching the round of 32 or the round of 16. And there's all this enthusiasm and all this momentum and all this all that good stuff that you can build on for the next decade or two. That really matters too, because we're still a developing country in the soccer sense.
And what I think brings it full circle for me is the story you told about Weston McKennie and meeting Landon Donovan and Carlos Bocanegra at age, whatever he was, about 6 or so. And
something like that. Yeah.
And getting the cleats signed and having that moment of inspiration, that the ticket pricing and the model and every way that FIFA has set this up runs a risk for us of that that moment not being duplicated for the next Weston McKennie, meeting this Weston McKennie, meeting this Christian Pulisic, and deciding this is me, this is what I want to be. And that would be a true tragedy in falling short. I think it's very hard for American sports fans to get their head around the idea of, we don't have to win this for this to be a resounding success, for us to outkick our coverage, to mix sports metaphors. And let me just ask you, like, this final piece, what to you is riding on this World Cup and the American performance for the future of soccer around the world, and particularly in the US?
They need to create a new collection of memories and of stars and of heroes. And there's the legacy. We talk about infrastructure and investment and all the rest. But I think it's problematic that when you turn on your TV now and you put on a soccer game, chances are that you're going to see the faces of that 1994 team. And Alexi Lalas and Kobe Jones and all Tony Miola and Tab Ramos and all those guys who were complete nobodies at the outset of the 1994 World Cup. This is something that Lawless told me for the book, is a few weeks before that World Cup, he flew in coach in a middle seat, and he was talking to this lady and tried to explain to her that he played soccer for a living, and she didn't believe him. And 3 weeks later, he was partying with Metallica, right? And he was on all these late night talk shows. And that's a pretty common story for these guys. John Harkes got named one of the sexiest people alive by People magazine, either just before or just after that World Cup. And they had to call him 3 times before he believed that he wasn't being pranked.
I was walking through Greenwich Village in 1995, and they had made the Jimi Hendrix Experience poster into the Alexi Lawless Experience as a poster with his long red hair. And gosh darn it, if it isn't one of the great regrets of my life that I didn't buy the darn thing on the spot. But absolutely. So there's an opportunity here to mint this kind of ongoing ROI of stars, of personalities, and our domestic league, which there's a ton of numbers on this. And I'm putting this into the Substack. Nate Silver came out with this morning. This is a really bracing number. The combined player market values for MLS. That's the value, the transfer value of all of the players. Like if another club were to pay a fee to get a hold of all of the players in MLS, it's 1.4 billion euro right now. PSG, Man City, Arsenal, some of these big European clubs, they each have nearly as much player value on their rosters by themselves. That's the scale of commercial opportunity, dollars or euros in this case, that we're talking about potentially sparking. But speaking of dollars, I want to move on to, this is a little bit more of the merger of our usual political and economic and financial fare, and talk a little bit about that corner of this. There's potentially a convergence here. You've got the story of FIFA and you've got the story of our current president, who seemingly both operate via the same scheme. It's treating the access to power and influence and commercial opportunities that they have as an ATM, as a cash grab that they can avail themselves of. And now the two are literally in business together. The head of FIFA handing Trump a peace prize, and the political cover that Trump is lending to FIFA's cash grab in the US, and the spilling over of geopolitical events into this World Cup that you outlined a few minutes ago. Where do you see this intersection? How is it coloring your coverage that you're providing in The Guardian and elsewhere of this aspect of the World Cup?
So US soccer didn't expect Trump to still be president when this World Cup came along. FIFA didn't expect Trump to still be president, right? Because the bid happens during the first Trump term, and he was either going to be defeated, and that would be that, or he'd have a second term, but it would be over before the World Cup, right? So that, I think, caught a lot of people by surprise. But there's also something about the way that FIFA is structured that really aligns with the way that Trump does his business, right? The FIFA politics could not be simpler. There's 211 member federations. Every year, FIFA sends a check to each one of those member federations that is there. Basically, they call it their soccer development, whatever the term is exactly. But it's basically they redistribute their own revenue to the member federations. And for a lot of soccer federations, because the majority of them are not England or Argentina or Germany or even the United States, that check from FIFA keeps the whole operation afloat and basically is how the soccer in that country is funded. The way you get reelected as FIFA president, because every federation has one vote and they all count the same, is to make sure that those checks get a little bit bigger every year. Those checks get bigger, you're going to be reelected forever. And that's something that every FIFA president has known and has understood, that they can manipulate that by simply making sure that revenues keep going up a little bit forever. And that's how you wind up with World Cups in Qatar, World Cups in Saudi Arabia, as we'll have in 2034. And in this case, World Cup under a presidency that's very sensitive, shall we say, to those same kinds of transactions, right? And so I think that Gianni Infantino, who is a very seasoned handler of autocrats and of, well, how far should we get into this? Kleptocrats, sure. He still proudly owns a Russian Order of Friendship, or whatever they call it, from having done the 2018 World Cup under Vladimir Putin and doing him a big geopolitical favor, right? Because this is after Russia started annexing places. And so I think Infantino just made a calculation that, look, I have to keep Trump on side. I have to keep him in my corner. And the way I do that is with obsequious flattery and things like the Peace Prize when he's unhappy that he didn't win the Nobel Peace Prize, and to just keep flattering this guy and to keep telling him what he wants to hear and to allow him to use the World Cup's refracted shine for his own political purposes. And we'll get along just fine. And that's been the FIFA playbook for as long as FIFA has existed. The 1934 World Cup was held in Mussolini's Italy, and they allowed him to very much turn that into a fascist propaganda tool. It's happened again and again in the history of the sport because Trump's kind of feral approach to politics and money is exactly aligned with the way that FIFA does its business.
Is there something about this political moment, this media moment, the way the world is these days that's supercharging this? There was the abortive attempt to create a European Super League, which was widely seen as a cash grab. It was even parodied on Ted Lasso. So it does seem like there's something going on in the soccer world. And I mean, you had the back-to-back low points, it seems. I mean, even against that kind of tough history for FIFA, you had the back-to-back low points of Russia and Qatar and
Mhm.
all of the open corruption and human rights abuse that went,
Yeah.
especially with the Qatari World Cup, paired with what's going on in the US with Trump, which we don't need to belabor. Is there something going on in your weekly coverage? Are you seeing a trend and a confluence there?
So the quick little side quest. Before the World Cup came to the US in 1994, Jack Kemp, the erstwhile Republican vice presidential candidate, congressman, very influential,
Right.
actually argued on the floor of the House of Representatives that the World Cup should not come to the US because football, the gridiron kind, represented freedom and capitalism, and soccer represented socialism. And this always struck me as so hilarious for a lot of reasons, but primarily just how immensely wrong it was. Because we can get into the NFL and how it's structured as a closed economy and all the rest, but soccer is unfettered capitalism. Soccer is a Reaganist, Thatcherist dream. It is just, there are basically no rules. You can spend what you want to spend. However, you get that money is fine. There is the occasional nod at regulation and punishment for teams that break what few rules exist, but they never have any bite. And so what you have in soccer is a perpetual financial arms race. And that translates to every single part of the sport: club soccer, international soccer. Everything just comes down to cash. You just mentioned it now, right? That MLS's overall value can be measured in the transfer value of the players combined, because everything in soccer is for sale. So that's kind of the animating force of the sport, is to just drive more money, drive more revenue, make more money. That's all it boils down to, because there's a direct correlation between how much money you have and how many games you're going to win in club soccer. So the Super League existed because a bunch of teams that were not in England had to figure out some way of competing with the Premier League teams that are hogging all the money at the moment. And they're like, okay, and they actually involved some Premier League teams. They're like, okay, we'll break off from our less profitable domestic leagues and we'll start this pan-European league that'll make sure that we all make a lot more money. And so in that sense, that's not so different from FIFA's approach to this thing and how they're trying to squeeze every drop that this World Cup will hold.
In all of your coverage, what's a story about world soccer or US soccer that you want to tell people more about while you have the platform, you wish that they understood more?
Oh, that's a good one. What I have always appreciated about soccer is just the kind of opportunity for community that it offers, because again, it's a common language across the world, and it feels like in the modern world there's so many things that used to bind us that are going away, right? People go to church less and less, and people don't know their neighbors very well anymore. They certainly don't rely on them the way they used to. There are all these sort of overarching builders of community that are going away, and I think that's why sports remains popular, because it's still something that allows people to gather and to find community and to find their people. And I think that's especially true for soccer. where because it is, you get in a cab in Chile, chances are you can talk to your cabbie about, not to get all Nick Kristoff, but to have an extensive conversation about soccer, right? And that's true just about anywhere. And that's one of the things I love about it, is that it's one of the great unifiers globally.
All right, let's get, and by the way, that very much lines up with this question. I've been trying to catch the questions in the chat, although because we started a little earlier than we usually do, we've had a slower velocity of chat questions coming up. But Mike Walker, 4219 says, you stepped into a temporary life on Earth and you find time to go to sporting events. Who are you? It's, yeah, I think I have wasted maybe a little bit of my time on Earth watching soccer. On the other hand, as you point out, this does occupy a communal nexus for people and a connection point that very few other things in human experience. Let me just throw a few grab bag questions at you. So, first of all, from the book, you did so much research, and not just on the USMNT, but soccer around the world. What's the most surprising story you unearthed that people are going to discover in the book? I don't want you to necessarily give away all the goods, but maybe give us a little teaser.
I had covered US soccer for 13, 14 years by the time I started on this book. And I was really taken aback by just the degree to which the program had collapsed between the 1950 World Cup, where the US stunned England with a team of dishwashers and carpet peelers, whatever you want to call it, in what is still one of the great World Cup upsets, and 1990, when they finally make it back. And doing this research, I found there was an 11-year stretch in the 50s and 60s where the US didn't win a game. They had an 11-year drought of winning a soccer game. They would show up to World Cup qualifiers. These are big, serious games with a team that had only been gathered the day before, if not the day of the game. They would sometimes travel and there'd be no uniforms. There'd be no balls to practice with. They, a lot of times, didn't have a coach, except for one period in 1966 when they had two coaches and nobody could figure out who actually was in charge. 1974 World Cup cycle, they once showed up to a qualifier without enough players. They only had 10 guys, and they had to pull someone from the stands just to make up the numbers so that they could play. And so it's just complete chaos, complete unseriousness. Guys weren't committed. Per diem was $5 a day if they were getting paid that at all. And then one of my favorite chapters in the book is in 1983, US soccer decides to enter the national team into the old NASL. In the North American Soccer League, where Pelé had played and Beckenbauer had played, and that was sort of briefly a fad. By 83, Pelé's long gone. All the stars are gone. The league is collapsing. The new commissioner decides that what they really need is Americanization and to give more of a sort of local flavor to this league. So international soccer and club soccer are separate things. So this was a weird thing to do, but they're like, okay, we're going to enter the national team into the NASL as Team America. And all of the national team players will move from their franchises onto Team America. And that'll save the league and it'll save the national team. And we'll get to the 1986 World Cup. And the first problem was about half the national teamers, such as they were like, no, thank you. I'm on the New York Cosmos. I'm on the Seattle Sounders. I'm not going to leave for this weird lark at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C. So what they wound up with was a roster that was a lot of guys who'd had their green cards, in some cases, only a few weeks. So it wasn't the national team so much as a national team tribute band. They hired this Greek guy, Alkis Panagoulias, who'd played college soccer here in his late 20s after being a pro, who turned out not to be a coach so much as a chain smoker along the sidelines, who really mostly spent his time going around to the various parties that Greek communities would give for him around the country. And so Team America finishes dead last. They score the fewest goals. They fold after 1 year. By the end of their first season, they're drawing 5,000 fans to RFK Stadium, which is cavernous. And the whole thing is just a hilarious disaster. But that's really, for me, where the modern history of the national team starts, because at least it was a little bit of ambition, even though it was soonishly poorly executed. They tried to get good again. And by 1990, just 7 years after that, they were back at the World Cup.
Absolutely. And then you have the story of 1994. And then 8 years after that, you have us making it gloriously to the quarterfinal. You have the Landon Donovan generation. A decade after that, you have the beginnings of the golden generation in the US. And that lands us at today. I will say that for me, your whole section on Bora Milutinovic, the stories about him, the characterization from Alexei Lalas that he speaks 5 languages, none of them well, and the story of him popping out of the back seat of the bus was worth it alone, but I'll leave that as a teaser for people for the book. Let's close out on this. If I had one objective here, it
Mhm.
was not only to try and get more people to read your book because I found it entertaining, delightful, and inspirational, but also to share something that's very important to me that I really care about, I think is inspirational and meaningful, and get more people, more Americans especially, to get behind this team, to get into the spirit of what we're about to do in this World Cup on American soil. Because as you outlined, the stakes are high and we have a real opportunity here to launch an entire next generation. My kids may reap the benefits of what we're about to do over the next month plus here in the US. So I'll leave it to you because you're the eloquent author and soccer writer. Maybe leave us with your best pitch for why people should spend some time, invest some of their effort in following and getting into this US team as we enter into this World Cup.
I think everything that's good and exciting and worth celebrating as a species, this is going to sound hyperbolic, but is reflected in the World Cup. I mean, it's take every major American sporting event and roll it together, and then you maybe come to 10% of the stakes of the World Cup, and now expand it to the entire world, right? It's so colorful, this tournament. You're going to see that every country sending the best that they have on the soccer field of their culture, of their personality, of the way that they believe the sport should be played, of the way they believe life should be lived, and they go up against each other in a friendly but competitive way. And it's a test of character, it's a test of ideas, it's a contest of civilizations. It's just endlessly fascinating because there's so many layers to it, right? You're going to see countries play against each other who have fought wars, who have been allies in wars, or who have had conflicts, or who at one time were the same country and then they've separated. There are always so many amazing storylines in this thing. There are so many undercurrents and so many subplots that even if the soccer itself isn't what draws you in the first place, it's usually that narrative and just that explosion of emotion of every kind that you see at the World Cup that to me makes it so special.
And for me, I hope that I've left people with just a taste of why I think this is going to be, as an event, absolutely enthralling. And for the US team, which every one of them, when they step on the field, I think, wow, this is great. This is America. This is what we're all about. And
Yeah.
what better way to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our country this summer than to support them and watch them? If you want to get into the spirit, there's no better way to do that than by picking up The Long Game, US men's soccer and its savage 4-decade journey to the top or thereabouts. And Leander, thanks so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
This was really fun. Thank you for having me.
And for everyone else out there, we've got another really outstanding show coming up next week. In the meantime, if I'm not going to see you till next week, stay safe, be well, and go USA.